When people think of garnets, they typically think of a bright red gemstone. However, not all garnets are red, and not all garnets are gemstones. Garnets are cards that you need to see in your deck, but not based on their own merits. Rather, they are used as a part of a combo with a card that is unusable otherwise, and as such, they tend to be cards you do not want to see in your hand at any time. I first learned of this term in regards to Yu-Gi-Oh! With the card Gem Knight Garnet, and its accompanying combo card Brilliant Fusion. Without getting too in-depth into Yu-Gi-Oh's mechanics, Brilliant Fusion was a strong combo card, which allowed for decks to ramp out important creatures, and it was an extremely effective engine.
Gem Knight Garnet
seems to know more about fusion summoning than I thought she would.
Gem Knight Garnet himself is a completely unassuming normal monster, yet in the case of many decks which used this combo, it was the catalyst for Brilliant Fusion, enabling much more impactful strategies. But it all rests on this one little guy with an interesting prerequisite. Brilliant Fusion uses monsters from your deck as fusion materials, meaning that if you drew your Gem Knight, it was now unusable for its intended purpose in your deck, and is instead essentially just a brick in your hand, being a random normal monster. Yes, it is still a creature, so there is some innate value in having it, as you can still play it, but its value has been greatly diminished. This is an interaction seen rarely, and designed around rarely as well. But why? Should designers be considering garnets as a fundamental type of card, or do they happen by accident? Is there unexplored design space specifically surrounding garnets, or do they exist simply as a side effect of when other cards are so strong that it's worth potentially bricking out with their combos? For these reasons, I wanted to explore garnets a bit more thoroughly, but in a game that I am much more familiar with, so instead of looking into Yu-Gi-Oh!, we're going to take a deep dive into garnets in Hearthstone. To assess whether a card could be considered a garnet, I had a few requirements. To be in contention, a card must follow one of these three guidelines. It must either 1. Change a deck in a fundamental way, yet be a brick in actual matches. 2. Combo with another card, typically a much stronger card, which when drawn no longer functions as a viable combo piece. Or 3. While it may have some value still when not played as part of said combo, when played standalone its value is deeply diminished in comparison to its potential. The most immediate thought when tackling this within Hearthstone was to think of start-a-game effects, such as Baku, Gen, and Dark Bishop Benedictus. These cards are all massive enablers for deck archetypes. They fundamentally change how a class or deck can be approached, but they all share the fact that in practice they are typically bricks in the decks that they appear in. No odd aggressive deck is ever going to want to see Baku in their hand, or at any point in the game really, and thus it definitely fits the requirement of being a brick in matches in real time. And start-of-game effects assuredly count as changing a deck in a fundamental way, as they completely change a core mechanic of the game, how your hero power functions. However, my issue with all of the start-of-game cards when determining if they really fit in the Garnet category is this. They're actually really strong. They were so strong, in fact, that in the case of Baku and Gen, they had to be rotated out of Standard extremely early compared to the rest of their set. Garnets are cards you don't want to see in your hand, sure, but they tend to have this sense surrounding them that they aren't really the star of your deck, they rather enable something insane instead. They're more of a dark horse, an unsung hero, a shitty little weak thing that is inherently unassuming, but when comboed has an incredible effect. And at the end of the day, while these cards were the first place that my mind went, I believe they're too powerful to really be great examples of a garnet. Some more common examples of garnets in Hearthstone I found include Xylag of the Abyss in Big Demon Hunter. This card combos well with Korea Fellsoul, and while the card itself is playable on its own, it is not really that strong. It's rather in the deck specifically for the chance to high roll multiple of them throughout the game with Korea, and for that reason I think it's a good entry point as a garnet. On top of that, I also found Molten Giant in Reno Paladin, which combos almost exclusively with High Priest the Call. Without High Priest the Call, Molten Giant is a complete brick in your hand, and even more so than in the normal sense of a brick, as in many of the times that you have it in your hand without the call, it will be completely unplayable, as it will cost 20 instead of 0. And then Dark Moon Tonk in Maxima Spellhunter. It combos well as a finisher for your deck with Maxima, but seeing as that your entire deck is spells and your only minions are Maxima, Oblivitron, and Dark Moon Tonk, if you draw a Dark Moon Tonk on, say, turn 2, it is essentially a brick that you will never be playing. It will never get its full value. However, while these all showcase interesting interactions between cards, these are much more on the obscure side than something like Gem Knight was in our Yu-Gi-Oh! Example. None of these combos have ever been really strong enough to dominate a meta, although I would make an argument that back in its day, Tonk and that Maxima list was a little bit bonkers. It's still formidable and wild too, so that might be a deck you want to check out at some point. But for listening to me ramble on about these kind of shitty examples forever, let's move on to what you've all been waiting for. The best 2 examples of Garnets in Hearthstone. I believe that there exist exactly 2 immaculate examples of Garnets in Hearthstone, and one is going to be really exciting to talk about, and one not so much. So let's get this out of the way. Patches the Pirate, everybody!
Yeah!
Yay, guys, we get to talk about Patches in a video about card design. No one has ever thought of such a thing, and he's so irrelevant to the game that I bet you've never even seen him before. Anyways, while Patches still definitely is a powerful card, everybody's had the experience of mulliganing him away only to draw him back on turn 1.
I'm okay.
Hello.
I think we're back to the losing part of the stream.
Don't fucking give me patches.
Wow! Wow!
And there's no worse feeling than breaking out that hard. It's a very common experience that every player's had, and thus it seemed like it needed to be mentioned when talking about cards that are obscenely powerful but can brick. And while it may seem outlandish in current year to be talking about whether Patches is powerful or not, back when he was revealed there was a lot of discussion back and forth as to his upsides, his downsides, how exactly powerful he was going to be, were pirates going to be worthwhile, etc., etc. Patches doesn't fit this bill perfectly, because even when he's drawn, his cost is so minimal, and he still has inherent synergy with his deck archetype that he might still be useful. But he's a great example of what a low-risk Garnet might take form as, and as such, felt like an obligatory winner. But wait. Don't turn off the video yet, because now we get to talk about the most interesting Garnet of all, and it's a card that even veteran players may not remember existing. Way back when, in 2019, there was an archetype called Tempo Rogue. It featured cards such as Southsea Deckhand, a 1-mana 2/1 with conditional charge, as well as Stone Tusk Boar, a 1/1 with charge, and it created many tokens in his hand with Bloodsail Flybooter, an unnerfed Evil Miscreant, and we'll give some credit to Pharaoh Cat, because it could help cycle its place in your hand with other cards. But in a deck archetype where your curve typically ends around 5 for heavy-hitting aggro mid-rangey cards like Faceless Corruptor, Leroy Jenkins, and Ziliax, this deck had something special, something so spicy that it took the meta by storm overnight. That's right, we're talking about Anubisath Warbringer, a 9-mana 9/6 behemoth of a card with the Death Rattle, give all minions in your hand +3/+3. But Video Man, why does a deck that aims to win by turn 6 run a 9-drop, you might ask? And that, my friends, is where I'd like to introduce you to, pre-nerf by the way, Necrium Apothecary. A 4-mana 2/5 with combo, draw a Death Rattle minion from your deck and gain its Death Rattle. In this deck, the only Death Rattle that you run was this Warbringer, which means in a game where you were so unfortunate as to draw your Warbringer, not only were you stuck with a 9-mana brick in your hand for the entire game, but it also removed one of the only hits for your Apothecary to draw, essentially bricking that card as well, and disrupting your entire deck's effective combo immediately. While the deck could still function with a brick card, or without this combo happening every game, a large part of the power of the deck came from this interaction, so ruining your combo on top of also now bricking out your hand was an incredible downside. And this overwhelming feeling of drawing Warbringer and thinking, fuck, my game might just be over now, is the feeling that I was really searching for when I was searching for some Garnets. This was a very difficult feeling to find in Hearthstone, And I believe part of the reason for this stems from the fact that Hearthstone has always been a 30-card format, whereas other card games can have much larger decks or have extra decks, special decks, stuff like that. When you have less room for potentially game-bricking cards or engines, it's difficult to justify running them on the off chance that they do brick. But as deck size grows, consistency is already going to be inherently lower, so running a Garnet and or their accompanying engine becomes less risky as the total overall level of risk when playing a larger deck is already greater than with a smaller deck. So essentially, as decks get larger, the chance that you're going to brick out gets lower, so the overall power versus risk assessment of a particular Garnet and engine is much easier to sway towards actually running the Garnet itself, rather than cutting it saying, you know, my deck is too small, it's going to brick out too consistently for it to be worth it. Well, that's it, guys. I hope this video was interesting, and let me know if you can think of any more examples of Garnets in Hearthstone that I missed, or if you think I misstepped in this video, classified something incorrectly, anything like that. I plan on doing a future video discussing more in depth the actual design aspects of creating Garnets, whether or not they should really be considered when designing cards, or how much emphasis should be placed on avoiding them, etc, etc. Bunch of nerdy design shit. So if that's your jam, keep on the lookout for that. But until then,